Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Internet Computer Developer Journey. In today's episode, 1.6 Managing Canisters, we're going to go through some of the common workflows to manage your canisters once they've been compiled and deployed. This episode is going to build directly off of the previous episodes 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5, so it's highly recommended that you follow along with those episodes before starting this episode. In the last episode, 1.5, Deploying Canisters, we deployed our first dApp onto the ICP mainnet. And so we're going to be jumping right in behind those instructions that we followed along with in that episode. And we're going to be using the two canisters we deployed in that episode, pull front end and pull back end. So in my command line window here, you can see that that was the last command that I ran. And we have the URLs and the canister IDs for our two canisters on the mainnet. So now we're going to take a look at, once these canisters have been deployed, like they are, what can we do with them and how can we manage them? And what are the important management workflows that we should be aware of in order to effectively develop our dApps? So to get us started, first we need a little bit of context into how management on ICP works. So to expose different management functionality to end users, ICP uses something known as the ICP management canister. While it's called the management canister, it's not actually a canister that exists with an isolated state and WASM code such as the canisters that we have deployed. Instead, it is more of an API that is used to expose that management functionality to end users. And this management canister is responsible for enabling some of the more advanced ICP features as well, such as the threshold ECDSA cryptography functionalities and integrations like Bitcoin and Ethereum. So when you go to perform a management operation, such as updating or creating a canister or simply starting or stopping a canister, each of those operations is sent to the management canister and then it's executed. Once it's executed, the messages are sent to the relevant subnet and then intercepted by the execution environment, which triggers the execution of the operation for that canister. So to get started, like I mentioned, it is highly recommended that you follow along with the previous 3 tutorials in order to get started. And if you follow along with those tutorials, the last commands that you should have run should be the DFX deploy command using the network IC flag. So now that we've got our canisters deployed, the first thing that is important for us to do is to get those canisters IDs. And so if you take a look in the terminal window on the right here, the canister IDs are going to be the first portion of this URL that is before .icp0.io. And to confirm this, we can use the DFX canister ID. And then we can either use the canister's ID if we already have it, which is a little bit redundant. So in this case, we are going to instead use the name and we're going to use pull backend. And then we want to make sure that we pass that network IC flag. And let me just adjust my CLI window over to make sure we can see that. Full command. Go ahead and adjust this over. So we can confirm that this is going to be our canister ID by running DFX canister ID and then the canister name. So in this case, pull front end, and then we'll use the flag network IC. And we can see that this canister ID here that's returned is the same that is used in this URL here. And then for our pull backend canister, we can see that the canister ID is going to be in the second half of the URL. And in this case, it was cut off by my terminal window size before I resized it. So we're going to get that full canister ID now by instead calling the pull backend canister with that command. And you can see that canister ID is returned. And alternatively, if you wanted to call this canister locally instead of on the mainnet, you would simply just remove the network IC flag. And since we haven't deployed it locally, we've only deployed it to the mainnet. In this instance, it's not going to return that canister ID since right now it's just deployed on the mainnet. So now let's get some information about our canister. So for that, we can use the DFX canister info command and then the name of the canister again. So in this case, let's use the pole backend canister. And you can see that I didn't use a flag for the network and I got that same error. So now we're going to use that network IC flag. And that will give us the information for the canister deployed on the mainnet. So in this case, this canister has 2 controllers, and then it has the module hash of the canister's WASM module. And so we can see that these controllers are 2 different principal identities, and the controllers are identities that are able to perform management functions on the canister. And so if we want to add another controller, first we need to make a new identity that we will add its principal as a controller. So we'll use the DFX identity new command, and then we'll just call it controller example. And then we can use the DFX identity use command to then switch to that controller example identity. And now that we're using it, we can get the principal of that identity with DFX identity get principal. And so we're going to then take this principal output and we're going to copy it. Now we want to switch back to our dev journey identity, since that is what we have been using thus far. In your case, it may be called full developer journey. In my case, I've just called it dev journey. So use whichever naming convention you chose when you set up the identity in one of the previous tutorials. And then we can use the DFX canister update settings whole backend, since that's the name of our canister. And then we're going to use the add controller flag, and we're going to paste that controller identity. And again, you can see I didn't use the network flag, so I'm getting that error again. So we'll use network IC at the end of that command. And this time we'll get the correct output that should indicate that the controller list has been updated with this new identity. And you can see it says added controller of pole backend, and it reflects that identity principal that we just passed to it. So now if we take a look at the output of the DFX canister info pole backend, and then remember the network IC flag, we can see that that new identity principal is listed as a controller now. Now, if we want to remove this principal for some reason, we can use the DFX canister update settings, pole backend, and then the remove controller flag. And then we'll paste that principal again, and remember the network IC flag. And then it will take a moment to send that execution to the canister. And we can see it has removed the controller. Now, instead of using add and remove, alternatively, you can use the set controller flag. So the set controller flag is going to remove any other existing controllers and set one single controller for the canister. So we can take a look at an example of that by using the DFX canister update settings, pole backend, set controller, and then we're going to paste that identity. So that's the principal identity of the controller example identity. And then we're going to use the network IC flag. And now when we send this, since remember we switched back into using our dev journey identity. So we are the current identity running these commands, and this set controller flag is going to remove our identity and the other second identity that is added as the controller of this canister. And it's going to just make that controller example identity the single controller of the canister. So it's going to give us this error and say you're trying to remove yourself as a controller of this canister. This may leave this canister unupgradable. do we want to proceed? And in this instance, we're going to say yes, since we are able to access the controller example identity. We have it as a local identity. We're in control of it, so we can switch back to it in order to manage this canister. But if you were performing this in a different environment and it was a production canister, you would want to double, triple check and make sure that the single identity that you're setting as the sole controller of the canister is in fact the one that you are able to access, and have the proper recovery methods in place for that identity in case something were to happen to it. Otherwise, you would have an instance of what is known as a black hole canister, where the identity isn't accessible and therefore the canister can't be controlled, so it can't be upgraded, and so it is effectively an immutable smart contract at that point. And that is a setup for certain workflows. You just want to make sure that if you choose that workflow, you understand the limitations and the permanence of that workflow. And so now if we run that DFX canister info, pull backend network IC command again, we can see that now only that controller example principal identity is listed as the controller. So now let's talk about managing the running state of the canister. So a canister has three states that it can be in. It can be running, it can be stopping, or it can be stopped. So running means that the canister is actively receiving inbound and outbound messages and executions. It is able to be interacted with. Stopping means that the canister is in the process of stopping and terminating its current processes and messages that are in flight. And then stopped means that the canister is not currently running, so it's not currently accepting messages or executing any processes. So let's take a look at the status of our canisters. So we can use the DFX canister status command. We're going to use the network IC flag, and then we're also going to use the all flag since we want to see the status of all of our currently deployed canisters. And now you can see that we have an error because we removed ourselves, our dev journey identity, as a controller identity of the pull backend canister. And so we can't see the status of it because we've removed ourselves. So we're going to fix that up real quick, and we're going to re-add ourselves as a controller. So we're going to use DFX identity, get principal. That's going to return the principal of our dev journey identity. Then we're going to use DFX identity use, and we're going to switch back to that controller example identity. Then we're going to go back to one of our previous commands where we added a controller. So the DFX canister update settings, pull backend, add controller, and we are going to paste in that identity of our dev journey, or that principal of our dev journey identity. Then we're going to use the network IC flag, and that will re-add our identity as a controller of the canister so we can proceed with our commands moving forward. And then we'll just switch back to DFX identity use and dev journey. All right, so now our DFX canister status, network IC, all, and now this command will work since now we are a controller of that pull backend canister again. And we can see the current status for that canister. First, we can see that its current status is running, the two controllers of the canister, and then we can take a look at information such as the memory allocation, the compute allocation, the cycles freezing threshold, which we will cover later in this video, the memory size, the balance of cycles that the canister currently has, its reserve cycles limit, that module hash of the WASM module again, and then we can see all the same information but for the pull front end canister instead. So if we want to go ahead and manage the running state of our pull backend canister, we can use DFX canister stop, then the canister name of canister backend, and the flag network IC. And we can see it says stopping code for canister pull backend with canister ID. And then we can take a look at the status of just this canister with DFX canister status, network IC, and then instead of that all flag, we're just going to pass the name of the canister, so pull backend. And we can see that it's already stopped, and we see more or less the same information as we did before. We just see that now the status is stopped. And then if we want to run that canister again, we can simply use the DFX canister start, network IC, and then pull backend. And then we can see it says starting code. And so then if we run the status command again, we can see that now it is running. So in this output, we can take a look at the balance of cycles for this canister. And this balance refers to how many cycles the canister currently has to pay for its resources that it uses. So things such as memory allocation, compute allocation, and any resources that are used to send and receive messages. So in this instance, we have 2.9 trillion cycles. And if we wanted to add more cycles, we would need to top up the canister cycles balance. So to top up that balance, we can use either a command in the command line here, or we can use other methods such as using cycles from the NNS DAP, and we can also use a third-party cycle service such as CycleOps. We aren't going to go through these two latter options in this tutorial, the NNS DAP option and the third-party service option, but we are going to go over using ICP, and we are going to go over using cycles in your cycles wallet. So if you followed along in the previous tutorial where we got our cycles coupon, you should already have cycles in a cycles wallet. If you haven't followed along with the options for using ICP in your account, then this option will not apply to you in this tutorial, and just focus on the instructions for using cycles in your cycles wallet. But once that cycles coupon runs out and you've used all of those cycles, you will need to obtain some ICP and convert those into cycles. So it is recommended that you familiarize yourself with that workflow as well. So take note while we go through it in this tutorial. So we're going to start off by setting the reserve cycles limit. This reserved amount is used to pay for future storage payments. This reserve cycles limit is important so that your canister is able to pay for any future storage that it needs, so it doesn't trap from running out of storage space. So first we can use the DFX canister update settings. And we can either use the canister ID or we can use the canister name. In this instance, we'll use the canister name of pull backend, and then we'll use the flag reserved cycles limit. And then we are going to set that limit. In this tutorial, it sets it to 42, but 42 cycles is a very small amount. So we're going to add a couple of zeros to that, and we will make it 42 million, which is still a very small amount. So how about actually we make it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We'll make it 42 trillion. That is a more realistic limit that we would want to set for our cycles. And then we'll use that network IC flag to make sure that we're calling that pull backend canister on the mainnet. And then we can see that that command doesn't return any information in itself. So we can then use the status command to check out the updated settings for this canister. So DFX canister status, and then pull backend network IC. And so before, this reserve cycles limit was 5 trillion, but now it should be 42 trillion. So that command updated successfully. And again, this is important since once the reserve cycles balance reaches that reserve cycles limit, the system is going to fail all operations that require cycles reservation. So if your canister is getting an error such as canister cannot grow memory by X amount of bytes due to its reserve cycles limit, you would need to make this adjustment to increase that cycles reserve limit. So now we're going to take a look at how to top up our canisters. So this first workflow using ICP, we can use the DFX ledger command, which indicates that we want to use the ICP stored in our ledger account. But first, let's get the balance of that to make sure we have some ICP to return. So we want to use the DFX ledger so let's see. So I'm getting a replica returned, destination invalid. So let's make sure that my account ID is okay. And so it's saying that this canister ID is not found. And so this probably indicates my Ledger Wallet account canister. So let's take a look at the documentation, and we are going to want to take a look at converting ICP tokens into cycles. And then let's see. So we most likely are going to need to recreate our cycles wallet canister first. Oh, no, you know what it is? It's because I wasn't using the correct flag. It can't find this canister since it's not deployed locally. DFX ledger, network IC, balance. Yep, there we go. Okay. So I couldn't find this canister ID because we aren't deploying on the local testnet right now. We are deploying on the mainnet. So this canister ID doesn't exist in the local network, and I didn't use the correct flag to indicate I wanted to call it to the mainnet. Okay, so now that we've got that, we can see that our balance is 19.9 ICP. So then we can use this to top up our canister with the DFX ledger top up. And then I'm going to use the canister name, but you can also use the canister ID. And then you can use amount. For this, I'm just going to send 1 ICP to it. And then we want to, again, remember that network IC flag. And the error here is that pull backend is not a valid input. It needs to be the target canister's principal. So we can go ahead and get that information again from the canister status. Nope, we can't get it from canister status. We need canister. We need to go back to our first step up here, where we got the canister's information, where we got the canister's ID. So DFX canister ID, pull backend, network IC. So we'll take that canister ID, and now we'll go back down to this command here and DFX ledger top up, paste in that canister ID, amount 1 ICP, network IC. And now we can see that the transfer is sent and the block height that the transfer is sent at. And then we can see that the canister was topped up with about 9 trillion cycles. So the current conversion rate of ICP to cycles at this time is about 1 ICP to about 9 trillion cycles. Now, if we want to get our cycles back from this canister, so if we, for whatever reason, have sent too many cycles to the canister, or if we no longer want to use the canister, but we don't want to lose those cycles, we can return these cycles by stopping the canister, by stopping and removing the canister. So first, let's do DFX wallet balance, and let's not forget that network IC flag. And we can see that our current balance is 177 trillion cycles. And then we want to canister stop, pull backend, network IC. And we can see that the code is being stopped for our pull backend canister. And then to get our cycles back, we need to use the DFX canister delete, pull backend, network IC. And we can see that it says beginning withdrawal of cycles to canister of this ID on failure, try no wallet, no withdrawal. And it's going to do some background processes in order to withdraw those cycles for us. And then it's going to attempt to transfer this many cycles, which is a rather large number, into our canister, and not enough margin. Interesting. So it's trying with more margin each time this number is getting smaller. And so ultimately it was able to transfer this amount of cycles and then delete the canister. And then we can use the DFX wallet balance, network IC, and we can see that now we have 189 trillion cycles. So lastly, for managing our canisters, we're going to set the canister's freezing threshold. And so you may have noticed this in the output of the DFX canister status. And now we're going to need to use the pull front end canister since our pull back end canister has been deleted. And we can see that it has a freezing threshold of 2 million. And the freezing threshold is a value defined in seconds. So this is not defined in cycles, this is defined in seconds. And it's used to calculate how many cycles a canister must retain in its cycles balance based off of the canister's memory consumption in order to prevent the canister from running out of cycles and therefore being removed from the mainnet once it's run out of cycles. And so this value of 2 million is the default, and this corresponds to 30 days. So this is 2,592,000 seconds, and that is 30 days. And so if we want to increase this instead of 30 days, if we want to make this a larger value, we can use the DFX canister update settings. Then we'll use pull front end, and then the flag freezing threshold. And in this instance, we'll make it 3472000. And I got that error because I forgot the network IC flag. And so we don't get any output of this to confirm, so we need to then run the dfx canister status command again. And we can see that that value has now been updated. And so lastly, we can cover deleting a canister, which we already briefly covered when we were returning the cycles from the canister of pull backend. We had to stop and delete the canister before we could get those cycles back. But now we will just stop and delete the pull front end canister as well. So we can do dfx canister pull front end network IC stop. And this didn't work because we put stop at the end, and a recent update of DFX requires that all the flags go to the end of the command. So putting stop at the end instead of the network IC flag is incorrect. So this needs to be updated. And then we can DFX canister delete pull front end network IC. And then we can see that, again, it's going to go ahead and withdraw those cycles from it. And we'll make sure that this process goes successfully like the other one did. We saw that error, but we saw that the DFX continued to retry until it was successful. So let's see if this runs into the same issue or not. And we can see that it does. This is not enough margin. Trying again with more margin. Okay, so it had the same behavior as the previous deleting the canister. It had to retry several times before it was able to successfully withdraw those cycles. And so that's going to wrap things up for today's episode. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with the next episode of the developer journey. This episode wraps up level 1. So the next episode will be the first level in level 2, where we will take a look at advanced canister calls. Be sure to leave us comments providing your feedback on the Dev Journey series, and if you run into any issues or have any questions, be sure to check out the documentation, the ICP Developer Forum, or the ICP Discord server. Take care, everyone.